The first thing Leona Price heard that morning was not her alarm. It was the building settling in the dark, a slow groan of old pipes and winter air, the kind of sound you learn to read when you have lived too long in places that were never meant to be permanent. The second thing she heard was the little cough from the couch. Soft, stubborn, the kind you pretend not to notice because noticing turns it into fear. Leona didn't move right away. She stayed still and counted her breath the way she did when money was tight, when time was tighter, when the world felt like it was leaning in too close. From the couch, her granddaughter's voice came out half asleep. "Nana?" "I'm here," Leona said quietly. Because quiet was what you did in an apartment where the walls carried every word. "Go back down." Riley's small hand appeared over the edge of the blanket. She was 10. Long legs, serious eyes, hair that never stayed in a ponytail. Her fingers curled like she was reaching for a rope. Leona reached back and let Riley hold on to her 2 fingers for a second. A small thing, a silent thing, the kind of thing that keeps you from falling apart. Then she got up, put on her sweater, and boiled water for instant oatmeal because the pantry was a list of maybes. She moved with the careful speed of someone who couldn't afford to drop anything. Not the spoon, not the mug, not her temper, not the job that wasn't really a job, not in the way people meant it. Her steno bag waited by the door, heavy with the machine and the extra cords she kept even though she had never once used them. Leona believed in backups, not because she was paranoid, because she had learned what happened when nobody believed you the first time. She checked her phone. A calendar alert blinked, city hearing, redevelopment approval. She did not have the luxury of forgetting, and the city did not have the habit of caring. In the hallway, she paused at the mailboxes. Her box held a thin envelope with her name in printed ink. She didn't open it there. She carried it upstairs to the small kitchen table, placed it beside the oatmeal, and opened it with a butter knife as if the paper might cut her. Past due. Her chest tightened, not with surprise, but with the familiar math of dread. The kind that makes you see your life in lines and columns, and the bottom line is always the same. Not enough. She folded the bill and slid it under a stack of school papers. A small lie, a small delay. Every week, she did something like that and told herself she was buying time. Across town, Malcolm Keene stood at a window that made the river look like it belonged to him. His office was high enough that the city shrank into something manageable. Roads became veins, buildings became blocks, people became movement, numbers became comfort. That was the kind of height success gave you, a cleaner view, and a colder one. Malcolm didn't feel powerful that morning. He felt behind. His assistant stood near the door with a tablet and a careful expression. "Your driver is downstairs. The council hearing starts in—" "I know," Malcolm said, checking his watch, not because he needed the time, but because it was something he could control. "What do we have?" She stepped closer. "Final packet. Condemnation vote, relocation plan, financing approval, and the community benefits agreement." Malcolm took the thick folder. The cover page had the city seal and the title in clean type, as if clean type could make anything clean. He flipped through without reading every line. Because he trusted the people he paid to read lines for him. He had built a company from a rented warehouse and a borrowed desk. He had clawed his way up without a net. That part of his story still lived in him like a scar. It made him proud. It also made him impatient with everything that moved slowly. He told himself this redevelopment was good. He told himself it was needed. A new transit hub, a mixed-use district, jobs, a safer corridor, a city that didn't bleed money into abandoned streets. He told himself the people who lived in those old row houses would be relocated, compensated, taken care of. He told himself that because the packet said so, and because believing it made it easier to sign his name. His phone buzzed. A text from his legal counsel: press ready, vote expected, keep remarks short. Malcolm stared at the words and felt that familiar wall inside him, the one that rose whenever feelings tried to show up in a room full of decisions. It opened the only thing he had saved from that old house, a locked drawer in the credenza he kept in his back office, ignored for decades like a bad memory. In Leona's apartment, Riley ate oatmeal and watched her grandmother braid her hair with fingers that were stiff from cold water and years of work. "Are you going to the big building again?" Riley asked. Leona nodded. "City Hall. Do you talk there?" Leona smiled, but it didn't reach all the way. "I write there." Riley's eyes narrowed, sharp in a way that made Leona think of her own mother. "Writing is talking." Leona paused. The braid hung half-finished between her hands. Sometimes children said things like that without understanding the weight of them. Leona understood too much. "Not always," she said softly, "but sometimes it helps." She kissed Riley's forehead, tucked her into her coat, and walked her downstairs to the neighbor who watched her before school. Mrs. Delgado opened the door with tired kindness and a housecoat that smelled like coffee. "You eat?" Mrs. Delgado asked. "We ate," Leona lied. "Thank you." Mrs. Delgado didn't push. She only touched Leona's arm, a quiet blessing in the hallway. "Be careful." Leona nodded and stepped out into the morning. The air outside had the sharpness of metal. Her breath came out in pale clouds. She stood at the bus stop with her steno bag digging into her shoulder, watching cars pass like they had somewhere better to be. She did not think of herself as brave. She thought of herself as careful. Careful was what you became when you had once been the kind of person the world could knock over without consequence. On the bus, she sat near the back, where she could see everyone without being seen. She watched a man in a suit scroll through his phone. She watched a woman in scrubs close her eyes with her head against the window. She watched a teenage boy bounce his knee like he was running from something invisible. Leona watched people because watching was her job and because watching kept you alive. At City Hall, the marble steps were wide and unforgiving. Leona climbed them with the slow determination of someone who didn't belong there but had to be there anyway. Inside, security waved her through with the mild disinterest reserved for people who looked like they never caused trouble. Trouble, Leona knew, did not always look loud. She checked in at the clerk's desk and received a badge that said "Court Reporter" in black letters. The badge did not include her name. It didn't need to. Her role was to record other people's names, other people's power, other people's decisions. In the hearing room, she set up her machine at the side table, slightly behind the council members, close enough to catch every word, far enough not to be part of the conversation. She plugged in, tested the keys, listened to the soft click of the steno as it came to life. A man in a gray suit placed a stack of packets on each table. He worked fast, efficient, eyes forward. Leona watched his hands. She always watched hands. Across the aisle, people filtered in, some dressed like they had come straight from work, some in sweaters that looked older than their faces. A few carried folders. A few carried nothing but hope. One woman clutched a photograph against her chest as if it could keep her home from slipping away. Leona's throat tightened, though she did not yet know why. She adjusted her headphones and looked down at the agenda. Her fingers rested on the keys, ready to capture the shape of the day. The council members took their seats. Murmurs rose and fell. Papers rustled like dry leaves. Then from the side door, Malcolm Keene walked in with people who seemed to orbit him. Leona recognized him immediately, though she had never met him. His face was on billboards at the airport, on charity gala invitations, on business magazine covers that called him a visionary. He moved like a man who had learned to hide exhaustion behind purpose. He shook hands, smiled with practiced ease, and took a seat near the front where important people sat. The seat beside him was empty, like a space held for someone he didn't allow himself to need. Leona glanced down at her steno machine again, the way you look at something familiar when a room suddenly feels too big. The chairwoman tapped the microphone. "We'll begin." The gavel sounded once, clean, official, final. And Leona, invisible in her corner, started writing down the words that could change everything, even before she understood what was missing. If you're still here, hit like and subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. The chairwoman introduced the proposal, the redevelopment, the vote that would move quickly because the city loved anything that sounded like progress. Leona's fingers flew, turning speech into record, turning emotion into text, turning lives into lines. In the back row, someone coughed, someone whispered, someone prayed under their breath. Leona kept writing, because if it wasn't in the record, it didn't exist. And today, she had the sudden, uneasy feeling that something important was being kept out on purpose. She didn't know it yet, but before this day ended, she would have to decide whether she was willing to be seen. And the cost of being seen would not be small. At the front of the room, Malcolm opened his packet and glanced at the first pages with the calm certainty of a man who believed paperwork told the truth. He didn't look up when a woman in the back row stood slowly, holding her photograph like a shield. He didn't look up when she began to speak. Leona did. And what she noticed next made her fingers hesitate on the keys just for a heartbeat, as if her body recognized danger before her mind could name it. The woman with the photograph did not raise her voice. That was the first thing that made her words hurt more. She stood with both hands on the picture, an old frame worn at the edges, the kind that had been dusted 1,000 times. Her hair was gray, pulled back tight. Her coat looked too thin for the season. She waited until the chairwoman nodded, then spoke into the open air of the room like she didn't trust the microphone to carry the truth. "My name is Yvette Aldridge," she said. "I've lived on Lark Street for 42 years. Leona's fingers captured the name, the street, the number of years, the shape of a life reduced to a sentence. She watched Yvette's mouth, the careful way she formed each word, like she was afraid the wrong syllable might be used against her. "I'm not against the new city," Yvette continued. "I'm not against jobs. I'm not against kids having something better than what I had. But you're telling me to leave my home like it's a chair you can move." She held up the photograph. It showed a small brick row house, a porch with a railing, flowers in a pot. Leona saw a child in the corner of the picture, blurred by old film, smiling like the world was safe. "You say you'll relocate us," Yvette said. "You say there's a plan. I asked for it. I called. I went down to the office. They told me it's in the packet." She turned her head toward the council table. "Where is it?" A murmur ran through the room. Leona heard the sound of shifting bodies, the stiffening of suits. The chairwoman smiled politely, the kind of smile that existed to keep things moving. "Ma'am, the relocation plan is part of the proposal and will be addressed." Yvette didn't sit. "I want to see it. I want it in writing." Leona wrote the words and felt something settle heavy inside her because she had been on the other side of that kind of smile before. A smile that made your request sound unreasonable. A smile that said, "You're slowing us down." Malcolm Keene leaned slightly toward his counsel and whispered something Leona couldn't hear. His counsel whispered back. Malcolm nodded once, as if the exchange completed the problem. He did not look at Yvette. Leona did. She watched the way Yvette's shoulders held tension like a person holding a door shut against a storm. She watched the way a younger woman beside her touched her elbow, a silent support. The presentation began. A consultant with a smooth voice took the microphone and clicked through slides Leona couldn't see clearly from her angle. She didn't need the visuals. The tone told her everything. Percentages, projections. Underutilized corridor. Blighted assets. Opportunity zone. The words were clean. The reality was not. In the audience, faces hardened. Some people stared at the floor. Some stared at the council members as if eye contact could create accountability. Leona wrote and wrote. Then she noticed the packets. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sudden explosion of realization. It was a small, quiet friction in her mind. The kind you feel when a drawer doesn't close properly, when a song has one note off. Leona had been a court reporter for years. She had learned the rhythm of official paperwork. She knew how these packets usually looked: agenda, exhibits, appendices, attachments. She knew the smell of fresh toner and the way staple holes lined up in the corner. And she knew that when you promised people a plan, you included it. Her eyes slid to the stack near her elbow, the extra copies for staff. She reached for one with her left hand while her right kept writing. She flipped to the index page, scanning. Exhibit A, parcel map. Exhibit B, environmental review summary. Exhibit C, financing outline. Exhibit D, public comment log. No relocation exhibit, no breakdown of where families would go, how long they would have, what assistance would be provided, no detail, no guarantee. Leona's fingers slowed for half a second on the keys. She forced herself to keep moving. Maybe it was in the appendices, she told herself. Maybe it was separate. Maybe... A man in a navy suit behind the consultant leaned toward another man and said something under his breath, too low for most of the room. Leona heard it anyway. "It's better this way," he murmured. "If it's not in the record, it can't be used to stall the vote." Leona's shoulders went cold. She turned her head slightly, not enough to draw attention, and saw the second man smile without humor. "Keene wants clean," the second man said. "He'll sign. He won't read the fine print. He never does." Leona's jaw tightened. The steno machine clicked softly beneath her fingers like it was impatient. She could have ignored it. That was the simplest choice, the safest. Leona had made safe choices before. Safe choices were how you survived, but Yvette was still standing. Another speaker approached the microphone. A young father with a tired face holding a folder that looked like it had been opened and closed too many times. He spoke about his mother's oxygen machine, about the narrow window of time they'd been given to move, about the way the city office treated him like an inconvenience. "They told me there's help," he said, "but nobody can show me where. They keep telling me to wait. What am I supposed to do? Wait until you put my stuff on the curb?" Leona wrote the words and felt the old anger rise, the kind she usually swallowed. The kind she had swallowed the day her daughter's landlord changed the locks while she was at work. The kind she had swallowed the day social services asked questions with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The system wasn't always loud. Often it was polite. The consultant returned to the microphone. "We want to be clear," he said, voice smooth as glass. "No one will be left without options. The city has resources." He paused just long enough for the words to sound reassuring. "We've been very thoughtful." Leona looked down at the packet again, at the missing exhibit that should have made those words true. Her fingers kept moving, but her heart didn't believe him. Comment: "This is wrong," if you felt that in your chest. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "We have time for 2 more comments. 2 more comments, and then a vote." Leona glanced toward Malcolm. He sat with his packet open, pen ready, face unreadable. He looked like a man preparing to do something important while assuming it had already been made safe by other people. And maybe that was his flaw. Not cruelty, not evil, just distance, just the kind of trust you develop when the world has always caught you before you hit the ground. Leona saw the gray-suited man who had handed out the packet slip toward the side door. She saw him glance at his phone, then at the council clerk's table where the official exhibits were stored. And she saw, with sudden clarity, that the missing exhibit wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Leona's throat tightened. She felt the weight of her steno bag, the weight of her badge that didn't carry her name, the weight of Riley's hand reaching for her in the dark. She thought, if this vote happens like this, it becomes law. She thought, if it becomes law, it becomes unstoppable. The consultant finished his remarks. The chairwoman leaned forward. "We'll proceed to deliberation," she said. Leona's fingers hovered on the keys, ready to capture the next set of words, but her mind had stopped writing and started counting consequences. If she did nothing, she would go home unseen. If she did something, she might not go home at all. And somewhere in that room, a woman held a photograph like it could stop a bulldozer. Leona looked down at the missing pages again and felt a quiet question form in her chest. Sharp and unavoidable. What is a record for if not to tell the truth? She reached toward the extra stack of packets, her hand moving like it belonged to someone braver than she felt, and in the next breath, she made a choice she couldn't take back. Leona didn't stand. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't interrupt the chairwoman or call anyone out. She knew better than to think righteousness alone could survive in a room built for procedure. She also knew that the system could swallow a loud protest and keep moving. So she did what she had always done. She worked inside the rules. Her left hand slid one of the extra packets closer. Her right hand kept writing as the council members began their measured comments, phrases like economic vitality and long-term benefit that sounded good on paper and cold in a kitchen. Leona let the words flow into the record while her eyes searched the packet again, careful, patient, like she was looking for a needle in a stack of polished promises. Then she saw it. A faint break in the page numbering. A small glitch that most people would miss because most people didn't live in margins the way she did. The packet jumped from page 21 to page 24. Not a reprint error, not a skipped slide, a missing sheet. Leona's pulse tapped once, hard, against her throat. She turned her head slightly toward the council clerk's table. The official exhibits were there, stacked in neat folders. The clerk, a woman with tight curls and a tired expression, was scanning her email with one hand while holding her pen like it was a weapon. Leona knew that clerk. Not her name, but her face. They had shared the same quiet nods in hallways for years, the nod that said, "I see you. We're both surviving." Leona leaned down to her steno machine and pressed a key that created a timestamp marker in her transcript. Not noticeable to anyone in the room, but later, it would matter. Then she did a thing she had never done in all her years of being invisible. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small portable scanner, flat, black, the kind she used when attorneys forgot to provide documents but still wanted a clean transcript. It wasn't against the rules, it wasn't common, but it was allowed. She slid the packet page by page under the scanner, not all of it, just the index page, the exhibit list, and the pages surrounding the numbering break. She saved the images directly to her encrypted backup drive, the one she kept for her own protection, the one she had bought secondhand and repaired herself. Her fingers moved with calm precision, but her stomach turned. because she knew what she was doing. She was building proof. Across the room, Malcolm Keene's counsel leaned in and whispered something. Malcolm nodded, without looking up. The chairwoman's voice rose, crisp, closing in on final remarks. Leona's mouth went dry. A vote was a kind of signature, an irreversible act, not ink on paper, but the same finality. Once it happened, the city could issue condemnation notices. Once those notices went out, families would spend months drowning in hearings they couldn't afford. Leona's eyes flicked to Yvette Aldridge. Yvette had finally sat down, but she didn't look relieved. She looked like someone bracing for impact. Leona's fingers hovered. She needed the missing page, not just proof it was missing, but where would it be? The gray-suited man, packet runner, consultant staff, whatever he was, reappeared near the side door. He glanced toward the clerk's table again, then toward the council dais. He looked like a man waiting for a timing window. Leona watched him and felt something old and sharp in her chest, the sense of a trick about to be completed. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "We'll move to the vote." A few people in the audience made small sounds like wounded animals trying to stay quiet. Leona didn't have time to search the room, so she did the only thing she could think of. She leaned toward the clerk during a brief pause. When one council member asked a procedural question and the microphone feedback squealed for half a second, Leona kept her voice low, almost casual, as if she were asking about a spelling. "Can I see the official exhibits list?" she asked. "My packet has a pagination break." The clerk glanced at her, eyes narrowing slightly. "What?" Leona tapped the packet with one finger. "It jumps, 21 to 24. The clerk's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. The kind of change that meant she understood what Leona was really saying. She hesitated, then slid open her drawer and pulled out a thin folder labeled Exhibits, Confidential. She didn't hand it over. She only opened it slightly so Leona could see the top page. Leona's breath caught. There it was. Exhibit E, Relocation Assistance Framework. It existed. It was supposed to be in the packet, and it was not. Leona's fingers curled against the edge of her table to keep herself from shaking. The clerk's eyes flicked to the gray-suited man near the side door, then back to Leona. "Don't," the clerk mouthed silently, barely moving her lips. Leona understood. "Don't touch it. Don't make a scene. Don't become the story." But Leona's mind flashed to Riley sleeping on the couch, to the past due bill, to the way the system treated people like Yvette. To the man's whisper, "If it's not in the record, it can't be used." Leona swallowed. She leaned in closer and whispered, "If it doesn't enter the record today, it disappears." The clerk's jaw tightened. She looked torn between fear and duty, between survival and the truth. The chairwoman's voice rose again. "Councilmember Sloan?" Sloan cleared his throat. "Aye." One vote. Leona's heart stuttered. The room felt smaller. "Councilmember Hart?" "Aye." 2 votes. Leona's hands moved without permission from her fear. She reached toward the clerk's folder. The clerk pulled it back instinctively. Her eyes widened, warning. Leona didn't force it. She didn't grab. She did something quieter. She slid her own transcript cover sheet forward, a blank page with the official header and her timestamp marker, then angled it under the clerk's folder like she was adjusting papers for convenience. With that small movement, she created a flat surface. Then, with the portable scanner still warm in her bag, she scanned the exhibit list page that showed Exhibit E. Not the full relocation plan yet, just proof of its existence on the official list. The scanner's light blinked once, silent, quick. The clerk stared at her as if Leona had just stepped off a cliff. Leona whispered, "I need the plan itself." The clerk's voice came out strained. "They'll come for me." Leona nodded because she believed her. "They'll come for all of us." Another vote. "I." Leona's mind raced. She could not steal the document. That would be criminal and sloppy and would give the system exactly what it needed, a reason to discredit the truth. She needed to do it the right way, the way that could survive scrutiny. She had one tool, the record. Leona leaned back to her steno machine and typed a brief note into her transcript metadata, an internal marker that her software would attach to the official submission. Exhibit list, discrepancy, observed, official, exhibit, not included in public packet. That alone wouldn't stop the vote, but it would create a crack, and cracks were where light entered. Then she did the moral act that would change her life. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope with her own name on it, her standard transcript submission envelope for the clerk. She wrote quickly on the front, in neat, calm handwriting, "Request, exhibit. Entered into record prior to vote." She slid it to the clerk. The clerk's hands trembled slightly as she took it. Her eyes darted to the gray-suited man again. Leona knew what she was asking the clerk to do. Pause procedure, acknowledge a missing exhibit, delay the vote. It was a small request, a silent request. It was also a grenade. Leona's voice stayed low. "If you don't, they will say it never existed." The clerk swallowed hard. Behind them, the chairwoman said, "We have a majority. Motion carries pending final documentation." Pending final documentation. Leona felt her stomach drop. They were about to finalize the paperwork after the vote when public eyes were gone. The gray-suited man began walking toward the clerk's table. Leona's hands went cold. Comment, courage. If you understand what that choice could cost. The clerk's face tightened into something like resolve. She stood up abruptly, microphone in hand, and cleared her throat. The room quieted, startled. "Madam Chair," the clerk said, voice shaking but audible, "there is a discrepancy in the exhibit list. Exhibit E is referenced on the official exhibits list, but is not included in the public packet." The chairwoman blinked, irritated. "We can address that after—" "No," the clerk said, and the single word sounded like a door locking. "It affects public notice. It must be entered into the record prior to final documentation." A hush spread across the room. Leona's heart slammed so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Malcolm Keene looked up for the first time, truly looked up, his eyes narrowing, attention shifting from paper to people. The gray-suited man stopped mid-step, face tightening. Leona sat very still, her steno machine capturing every syllable, every tremor in the clerk's voice, every pause that suddenly mattered. She had not shouted, she had not begged, she had simply placed one line where it belonged. And now the entire room had to deal with the truth that someone invisible had forced into the light. But light, Leona knew, could make you a target. As the chairwoman frowned and leaned toward her counsel, Leona felt the first wave of consequence roll toward her like a tide. Because the system didn't like being corrected, and it always tried to punish the hand that pointed to the missing page. The moment the clerk spoke, the room changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of shift you feel in your teeth, like a storm moving in under a clear sky. Chairs stopped creaking. People stopped whispering. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The chairwoman's smile didn't disappear, but it tightened. "We can correct the packet after the meeting. This is—" "Public notice is not a packet correction," the clerk said. voice steadier now that she'd crossed whatever line she'd been afraid of. If Exhibit E exists on the official list, it has to be available to the public before final documentation is executed. Executed. Leona's fingers caught the word and kept it in the record like a pinned insect. Across the aisle, the gray-suited man's face went flat. He wasn't surprised. He looked annoyed, like someone who'd been forced to acknowledge the existence of a problem he thought he'd buried. Malcolm Keene sat forward, finally awake to the room in a way that had nothing to do with the agenda. His eyes went from the clerk to the chairwoman to the packet in his hands, then back to the clerk again. "Is this true?" he asked quietly, not into a microphone, but into the space between him and his counsel. His counsel leaned in close, voice low. "It could be a clerical issue. We can handle it after." Malcolm didn't nod. He looked down at his packet and flipped, faster now, like a man searching for something he'd assumed would be there. His jaw worked once. A muscle near his temple jumped. Yvette Aldridge stood again. She didn't lift her photograph this time. She didn't need to. "I asked for it," she said, voice hoarse but clear. "They told me it was in your papers." The chairwoman lifted a hand. "Ma'am, we're in deliberation." Yvette didn't sit. "So was I, for 42 years, and nobody asked me." A few people in the audience made soft sounds of agreement, not cheering. Something older than that, recognition. The chairwoman turned toward the city attorney. He leaned toward her, whispering, and Leona could only catch fragments. "Not required, can be appended, don't derail." Leona kept writing. She kept her posture small. She kept her eyes down because she understood what attention could do to someone like her. But then the gray-suited man stepped forward just one pace and spoke to the chairwoman as if he belonged there. "Madam Chair," he said, smooth and confident, "our team provided all materials required under the notice provisions. Any internal exhibits not meant for public distribution can be addressed administratively. There's no reason to slow the vote." Leona felt her throat tighten. Not meant for public distribution. That was the whole trick. Say it like it was normal. Say it like transparency was optional. The clerk's hands trembled, but she didn't back down. "It's labeled relocation assistance. That directly affects the public." The chairwoman's eyes flashed. "We're not going to argue process on live record." Leona's steno keys clicked steadily, catching every syllable. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, but she did not let her fingers show it. Malcolm Keene raised his hand slightly, an unfamiliar gesture in a room where he was used to speaking last. "Madam Chair," he said, and the microphones picked him up, because power always found a way to be heard. "Can we take a short recess? 5 minutes. I'd like to review what's being referenced." The chairwoman hesitated. It wasn't her instinct to grant time. But Malcolm Keene wasn't just any attendee. He was the funding partner. The city's shiny proof that this wasn't just a government move. It was business confidence. She forced a smile again. "A brief recess," she said. 5 minutes. The gavel tapped once. The room broke into motion like a shaken snow globe. People stood, suits clustered. Residents gathered around Yvette, around the young father, around each other. Leona watched bodies drift toward the exits, toward the hallway water fountain, toward whispered strategy. The gray-suited man moved fast toward the clerk's table. Leona saw it coming. She saw the purpose in his stride. She saw his hand lift, the way it would land on the clerk's folder like ownership. Leona stood, not fully, just enough to shift her chair, enough to put her body between the man and the clerk's open drawer. Her badge swung slightly. Court reporter. The man glanced at her with polite irritation. "Ma'am," he said as if she were furniture. "Step aside." Leona kept her voice low. "I'm working." He leaned closer. "You just made yourself part of this." Leona's stomach turned, but she didn't move. "I made the record accurate." His eyes narrowed. "You don't understand how this works." Leona met his gaze for the first time, steady and quiet. "I understand better than you think." Behind her, the clerk reached into the drawer and slid the folder deeper, out of reach. Her face was pale. The gray-suited man exhaled, a sound that carried threat without words. He turned and walked away, but not before Leona saw him glance toward a man near the side door. Security, perhaps, or someone pretending to be. Leona sat back down, hands cold. She did not know if she had just protected the clerk or painted a target on both of them. In the hallway outside the chamber, Malcolm stood with his counsel and a city staffer. He held the packet open like it had betrayed him. "Where is Exhibit E?" Malcolm asked. The staffer stammered. "It's internal. It's referenced," Malcolm said, tapping the exhibit list with one finger. "If it's referenced, it exists. If it exists, why isn't it here?" His counsel tried again. "Malcolm, this is municipal procedure. The relocation framework is often summarized." "I'm not asking for a summary," Malcolm said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was different now, less polished, more personal. "I'm asking what I'm signing on to." He glanced down the hallway and saw, through the chamber doors, the residents gathered in small clusters like people trying to keep warm. He didn't look away as quickly as he had before. Leona packed her scanner back into her bag with hands that shook just enough to annoy her. She kept her face calm. She had learned long ago that the system treated emotion like evidence of instability. The clerk leaned in close, voice barely there. "They'll call my supervisor." Leona nodded once. "They'll call mine too." The clerk swallowed. "Why did you do that?" Leona thought of Riley's hand reaching for her in the dark, thought of the past due bill hidden under school papers, thought of Yvette's photograph. "Because if the truth doesn't get in the record," Leona whispered, "it won't get in anywhere." The clerk's eyes glistened, but she blinked it back hard. "My sister lost her apartment like this," she said so quietly Leona almost missed it. A notice in the mail and a promise they never kept. Leona's throat tightened. "Then you know." The recess ended too quickly. The gavel sounded again, and everyone returned to their seats like magnets pulled back into place. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "We will proceed." Malcolm rose slightly. "Before we proceed," he said, "I want Exhibit E entered into the public record now." The chairwoman's eyes widened a fraction. "Mr. Keene." "If my name is part of this redevelopment," Malcolm said, "then the terms that affect people's lives need to be visible. Otherwise, I'm not comfortable moving forward." A murmur spread, not cheers. Just something like relief trying not to hope too hard. The gray-suited man's jaw clenched. The city attorney leaned toward the chairwoman, whispering fast. The chairwoman's face tightened, then smoothed again, the way people do when they're forced to adjust. "We can request the exhibit," she said. "The city will provide—" "Not later," Malcolm said. "Now." Leona wrote the words and felt the strange sensation of the ground shifting under a machine that had always felt immovable. The clerk stood, hands trembling, and reached into the drawer. For a moment, Leona thought she might drop the folder. That would be a small tragedy in a room built for big ones, but she didn't drop it. She placed Exhibit E on the table, opened it carefully, and slid it toward the microphones. Leona's heart thudded. Because now, the exhibit would be read. Now the public would see. Now the system would either hold or lash out. And as the chairwoman began to flip through the pages with a stiff expression, Leona felt a new fear rise, one that didn't come from what was missing, but from what might be inside. Because sometimes the truth wasn't just that something was hidden. Sometimes the truth was that what was hidden was worse than anyone expected. And the first line the chairwoman read made Malcolm Keene's face go still. Leona saw his grip tighten on his pen, and she knew, with a cold certainty, that the real fight had just begun. At the end of the table, the gray-suited man's eyes flicked once toward Leona, sharp, measuring, as if he just decided what to do with her next. The chairwoman read in the same voice she used for zoning changes and parking ordinances, flat, procedural, built to drain the human out of any sentence. "Relocation assistance," she said, "will be made available to qualifying residents consistent with administrative capacity." Leona heard the words and felt her stomach turn. Qualifying. Administrative capacity. Those were the kinds of phrases that sounded harmless until you tried to live inside them. Yvette's hands clenched around the photograph frame. The young father leaned forward, brow furrowed, as if he could force clarity by staring. Malcolm Keene didn't blink. He watched the page like it was a mirror. The chairwoman continued. "Assistance is subject to documentation requirements and may be modified without notice." A low sound came from somewhere in the audience. Not a shout, a small, wounded laugh. "Modified without notice," Yvette said quietly, like she was tasting the words. "So it's not a plan, it's a suggestion." The chairwoman shot her a warning look. "Ma'am." Malcolm's counsel leaned in, whispering, "This is standard language. It's flexible. It protects the city." "Protects the city from what?" Malcolm murmured back. His counsel didn't answer. The chairwoman turned the page. "Relocation vouchers will be provided for temporary lodging not exceeding 90 days, contingent upon resident compliance with program rules." Leona's fingers kept up, but her mind was already seeing the picture. Temporary lodging, 90 days, contingent, rules. She had been in rooms like that. Temporary becomes permanent when the system wants you to disappear quietly. The young father raised his hand, voice cracking. "Where do we go after 90 days? The chairwoman's mouth tightened. "There are additional resources." "Where?" he pressed. The chairwoman glanced at the city attorney, then back. "The city will provide information." Leona could feel the anger ripple in the room, but it wasn't the kind that explodes. It was the kind that collapses inward. Malcolm sat back slowly. His eyes moved down the page to a section bolded with a heading that meant nothing to the crowd but everything to someone who understood consequences. Eligibility exclusions. Leona saw his gaze stop there. His jaw tensed. He spoke before anyone else could redirect the moment. "Read that," Malcolm said, voice calm but firm. The chairwoman blinked. "Mr. Keene, we—" "Read it," he repeated. The chairwoman's eyes narrowed, but she did it. "Relocation assistance does not apply to residents in units classified as non-conforming, subleased, or informal occupancy arrangements." Leona heard someone whisper, "That's me." The chairwoman continued, voice still flat. "Assistance does not apply to residents with past due municipal fines or unresolved documentation issues." Leona felt her blood run cold. Past due. Documentation issues. That was half the room. That was most of the city if you wanted it to be. Malcolm's face went tight with something like shame. Not because he felt personally accused, but because he recognized the trick. A plan that sounded like help but was built to disqualify. He turned to his counsel. "Did you see this?" His counsel's smile came out strained. It's a draft framework. These are common compliance measures. Common for who? Malcolm asked, and the question hung there like a quiet indictment. The chairwoman cleared her throat. The motion has already carried pending documentation. We've now entered Exhibit E. We can proceed to finalize. No, Malcolm said. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The chairwoman's eyes widened. Mr. Keene, the council has voted, and I have funding commitments tied to my company's participation, Malcolm said, voice still controlled. If this relocation framework is what the city considers acceptable, then I'm not participating until it's revised with measurable guarantees. The city attorney's face changed. Leona watched him calculate. The gray-suited man leaned forward sharply. Mr. Keene, with respect, this is not the forum. It's exactly the forum, Malcolm said, because these people are here and because my name is on your press release. The room held still again. Even the microphone seemed to hum quieter. Leona wrote every word and wondered for a heartbeat what it felt like to have power and use it like that. Then she remembered. Power rarely does it without cost. The chairwoman called an emergency sidebar. Council members huddled. The city attorney spoke fast. The gray-suited man's mouth moved like a man trying to put toothpaste back in a tube. Leona kept her head down and her hands moving, and then her phone buzzed in her bag. She ignored it at first. Her job was to record, not to react. It buzzed again. Leona's stomach tightened. She reached into her bag and glanced. Unknown number. She didn't answer. It buzzed again, immediately. A text followed. Call me now. This is your supervisor. Leona's fingers stumbled on the steno keys for half a second. She forced them steady again. The hearing adjourned temporarily with another gavel tap and a promise of continued discussion. Residents filed out slowly, faces exhausted. Some looked relieved. Some looked scared. Most looked like people who had just seen how close a machine came to crushing them. Malcolm Keene walked out through a side hallway, council close behind him, city staff trailing like nervous birds. Leona packed her equipment with hands that felt too heavy. The clerk avoided her eyes. Not because she was angry, but because fear had entered the room and sat down between them. In the hallway near the elevators, Leona finally answered her phone. Her supervisor's voice was tight. Leona, where are you? At City Hall, Leona said carefully. I'm still on assignment. You interfered, her supervisor snapped. That's what I'm hearing. Leona swallowed. I requested an exhibit be entered into the record. That's not interference. That's procedure. Procedure is not your job, her supervisor said. Your job is to record, not provoke. Leona stared at the marble floor, at the scuff marks from thousands of shoes that had walked these halls with their own kinds of desperation. I didn't provoke, Leona said. I documented. A pause, then colder. They're saying you were scanning documents. Leona's heartbeat thudded. I scanned the exhibit list discrepancy, Leona said, choosing every word like it mattered, because it did. As backup, for accuracy. Backup, her supervisor repeated, like the word offended him. You're suspended, Leona, effective immediately. Do not return to any city assignment until we review. Leona's mouth went dry. Suspended means unpaid. That's what suspended means, he said. And if you push this, you'll be terminated. You hear me? Leona's vision blurred for a second. Not from tears, but from the sudden mental image of Riley's face when the lights got shut off. Of the past due envelope hidden under school papers. Of the bus fare she counted in quarters. Who called you? Leona asked quietly. Her supervisor hesitated. Does it matter? Yes, Leona thought. It matters, because it tells me how fast the machine moves. She ended the call without another word. She leaned against the wall near the elevator and closed her eyes for a second, the way you do when you need to keep yourself from making a sound in public. The clerk appeared beside her, almost silently. "They called mine," she whispered. "They told me I violated chain of custody." Leona let out a slow breath. "We didn't." "They don't care," the clerk said, voice breaking. "They care about control." Leona opened her eyes and looked down the hallway where residents were leaving, where Yvette hugged the young father like they were family now, where hope looked fragile and temporary. Leona's sacrifice loop tightened in her chest like a knot. She had done the right thing, and now the cost was arriving. And she still didn't have the full relocation framework secured in a way that couldn't be altered after the fact. She had scanned the discrepancy, she had recorded the hearing, but the exhibit itself could be revised, modified without notice, and filed later as if nothing had happened. Leona's mind moved fast. She needed a stable copy, a time-stamped, verifiable copy, not to expose anyone, not to humiliate, just to keep the truth from being edited out. She turned toward the clerk. "Where does the city store official exhibits after hearings?" The clerk blinked, startled. "Record. Basement. Digital archive too, but what?" The clerk's voice dropped. "Access is restricted, and the logs can be cleaned." Leona felt the floor tilt slightly under her. Cleaned. So the missing exhibit wasn't the only thing that could disappear. The proof could vanish too. Down the hall, Malcolm Keene exited a conference room alone for a brief moment. He looked different now, less polished, more burdened, like a man realizing he had been driving with his eyes half closed. He pulled something from his pocket and held it in his palm, a worn silver key. He stared at it like it was trying to tell him something he had ignored for years. Leona watched him from a distance and felt a strange, painful curiosity. What was he remembering? And why did it look like regret? She tightened her grip on her steno bag and made a decision that frightened her more than the suspension. If the city's archive could be cleaned, then she needed a copy that lived outside the city, a copy the system couldn't quietly erase. Leona turned toward the stairwell that led down, where public hallways became staff corridors, where marble gave way to painted concrete and fluorescent hum. And as she descended alone, she realized she was no longer just recording a story, she was inside it. At the bottom of the stairs, a locked door waited, plain, unmarked, the kind of door people never notice. Leona didn't have a key, but she had something else. She had the record, and she had a reason. Leona stood in front of the unmarked door and listened. Behind it, she could hear the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the soft mechanical sigh of an HVAC system working too hard. The basement always sounded like that, like a building breathing through its teeth. A small sign on the door read, "Authorized personnel only." Leona's badge didn't grant authorization down here. It never had. Court reporters were welcome in the room where decisions happened and unwelcome in the rooms where decisions were stored. She turned away before anyone could see her hesitate, walked down the corridor as if she had every right to be there, and found the public records counter, a little window cut into a wall with a bell no one wanted to ring. A woman sat behind the glass, not young, not old, mid-60s maybe. Her hair was pinned back with a clip shaped like a leaf. Her glasses sat low on her nose. She was reading a book that looked like it had been repaired with tape. Leona cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me." The woman looked up, eyes sharp, assessing. "Yes." Leona held up her badge. "I'm a court reporter. I need to verify an exhibit that was entered today." Relocation Assistance Framework, Exhibit E. The woman's gaze flicked to the badge, then to Leona's face. She didn't ask for a last name. She didn't need to. She already knew what kind of person stood at a counter like this. She knew what it meant when someone came down to the basement right after a hearing. "Those exhibits aren't filed yet," the woman said, tone neutral. Leona swallowed. "Is there a way to place a hold or request a copy once it's logged?" The woman's eyes stayed on Leona. "You can file a public records request." Leona nodded. "I'd like to." The woman slid a form under the glass without enthusiasm. It was 3 pages. It asked for identification, purpose, acknowledgement of fees. Leona stared at the fee schedule section and felt her stomach drop. How much for a certified copy? The woman didn't flinch. "Depends on length." Leona thought of the envelope that said, "Past due." Thought of bus fare. Thought of Riley's school lunch balance. She picked up the pen anyway, because the thing about doing the right thing was that it rarely came with a discount. Leona filled out the form carefully, printing her words in clean letters so no one could claim they didn't understand her. Under purpose, she wrote, "Verify public record accuracy." She slid it back under the glass. The woman read it slowly, then looked up. "You're suspended," she said, not as a question. Leona's throat tightened. "How do you know?" The woman's eyes didn't soften, but something in her tone did. "Basement hears things. Upstairs calls downstairs. They always do." Leona felt her cheeks warm with shame and anger. "I didn't do anything wrong." The woman tapped the form with one finger. "Wrong is a flexible word in this building." Leona held her gaze. "Can you help me?" The woman studied her for a long moment. Then she stood, disappeared from the window, and returned with a different folder, a thin one, older, edges worn. She opened it under the glass just enough for Leona to see a stamped page. "Audit log request procedure." Leona's heart thudded. "What is that?" The woman's voice lowered. "A record of who uploads and removes documents from the city's digital archive. Timestamps, user credentials, the part of the truth people forget exists." Leona stared. "I can request that?" "You can," the woman said. "But you need a reason that survives daylight." Leona's mind raced. The exhibit was missing from the public packet. It was referenced on the official exhibits list. It was entered late. The woman nodded once, as if Leona had just answered a test. "That's your reason." Leona felt something unsteady inside her, hope mixed with fear. "Why are you telling me this?" The woman's eyes shifted for a fraction of a second, like she was looking at something behind Leona. An old memory, perhaps. A person she had once been. "My name is Evelyn," she said. "I used to think paper was boring. Then I watched paper take people's homes." Leona's throat tightened. "I'm Leona." Evelyn nodded as if names mattered down here. "They'll try to file a revised Exhibit E later," Evelyn said quietly. "They'll call it clarified. They'll say it's the same." Leona's stomach clenched. "Can you get me the copy that was entered today?" Evelyn looked toward the locked door, then back. "If I do, I risk my job." Leona nodded slowly. "If you don't, people risk their lives." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "You don't know that." Leona thought of the exclusion clause. Past due municipal fines, documentation issues, informal occupancy, people who lived in basements, in split units, in places they could afford because the system told them they didn't officially exist. Leona whispered, "I know enough." Evelyn inhaled slowly, like she was deciding whether to step into the river. Then she slid a small laminated card under the glass. an instruction sheet for filing an audit log request with one line circled in pen. Emergency preservation request. Leona's eyes widened. That's real? Evelyn's gaze stayed sharp. It's rare, but it's real. It requires an initiating authority. Leona's hope faltered. I don't have authority. Evelyn leaned closer to the glass. Not officially. Leona stared, confused. Evelyn tapped Leona's badge. But you have something they need. A verbatim record. If you attach your transcript marker about the exhibit discrepancy, it becomes harder for them to pretend nothing happened. Leona's pulse quickened. She had already placed that marker. She had done it quietly, instinctively, the way you do when you're used to needing proof. What if they terminate me? Leona asked. Evelyn's face didn't change. They might. Leona swallowed. I have a child at home. Evelyn's eyes softened, just barely. Then you understand why this matters. Leona's sacrifice loop tightened. Doing the right thing was no longer theoretical. It was rent. It was groceries. It was Riley's stability. Upstairs in a conference room with glass walls, Malcolm Keene sat with city leadership and his council. The mayor's chief of staff leaned forward, voice smooth. Malcolm, we appreciate your concern. The exhibit language can be refined, but delaying the project creates risk. Investors don't like uncertainty. Malcolm's eyes stayed fixed on the paper in front of him. Families don't like uncertainty either. The city attorney cleared his throat. Mr. Keene, relocation assistance frameworks are inherently flexible. We can add clarifying language. You mean you can change it later, Malcolm said. His counsel tried to soothe. Malcolm, we can negotiate protections privately. This is politics. Malcolm sat back, the worn silver key pressing into his palm. He rolled it between his fingers like a habit he didn't understand. My mother used to say something, he murmured almost to himself. His counsel blinked. What? Malcolm looked up, eyes sharper now. She used to say the first lie is always the one that sounds like paperwork. The room fell quiet for a fraction of a second. The mayor's chief of staff smiled politely. Malcolm, we're not lying. Malcolm's gaze didn't soften. Then show me the full plan. Show me what you plan to keep out. Back in the basement corridor, Leona held Evelyn's laminated card like it was a fragile promise. Who can initiate an emergency preservation request? Leona asked. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward the ceiling, as if she could see through floors. The city auditor, the inspector general, sometimes a council member, sometimes someone with enough influence that people decide it's safer to comply than to ignore. Leona thought of Malcolm Keene, thought of the way he had said, not later, now. What if he's only slowing down because he doesn't want his name attached to backlash? Leona asked. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Then she said, maybe. But even selfish truth can still be truth. Leona breathed out slowly. She pulled out her phone, opened her notes, and typed a short message to the only contact she had near Malcolm Keene. A staff email address printed on the hearing's contact sheet. She wrote carefully, without accusation, without emotion, just fact. Exhibit E was missing from the public packet. It was entered late. I recorded it. I have transcript markers and pagination discrepancy documentation. If Exhibit E is revised after today, the record will show it. She stared at the message for a long moment. Sending it would be another irreversible act, another point of no return. Her thumb hovered. Then she pressed send. Upstairs, Malcolm's phone buzzed. He glanced down and read Leona's message. He didn't know her name yet, not really, not beyond a badge, but he felt the weight of what she was offering him, a way to anchor the truth before it could be edited. He looked at the city attorney. "I want an independent preservation of today's exhibit," Malcolm said. "Immediately." The city attorney blinked. "That's not necessary." Malcolm's voice stayed calm. "If it isn't necessary, it shouldn't be a problem." Leona stood in the basement hallway with Evelyn's card and felt something shift again. Not relief, not victory, just the sense that a door had cracked open, and behind it was a fight big enough to swallow her whole, because the machine didn't like being cornered, and it was about to push back. As Leona turned to leave, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a different number. A text. "We know what you did. Stop now." Leona's hand went cold around her phone. She didn't look back, but she could feel in the quiet hum of the basement that she was no longer invisible. And when you stop being invisible, you become something else, a target. Leona didn't tell Riley about the text. That night, she made spaghetti from the last of the noodles in a jar of sauce that had been sitting in the cabinet like a small emergency waiting to be used. She let Riley talk about school, about a teacher who smelled like peppermint, about a friend who cried in the bathroom, about a math quiz that felt unfair. Leona nodded at the right places. She smiled when Riley smiled. She kept her voice steady, but her mind kept replaying the words on her phone like they were stamped on her skin. "We know what you did." After dinner, Riley sat on the couch with a library book, legs tucked under her, hair falling into her eyes. Leona washed dishes slowly, listening to the water run, listening to the building settle, listening for footsteps in the hallway. Every sound felt like a question. When Riley finally yawned, Leona tucked her into the blankets on the couch the way she always did, softly, carefully, as if gentleness could protect them from the world outside their door. "Nana?" Riley murmured, eyes heavy. "Yeah, baby." "Are we okay?" The question was so small, it could have been nothing. But Leona knew it wasn't nothing. She swallowed. "We're okay," she said. "We're together." Riley's fingers curled around Leona's sleeve. "You promise?" Leona's throat tightened. She bent down and kissed her forehead. "I promise I'm not going anywhere." It was the kind of promise you make when you're terrified. After Riley fell asleep, Leona sat at the kitchen table under the weak overhead light and opened her laptop. She pulled up her transcript file from the hearing, the one she had backed up onto her encrypted drive. She stared at the timestamp marker she'd inserted, the quiet note about the exhibit discrepancy. She attached it to a formal email addressed to the city clerk's office, the inspector general's public contact, and Malcolm Keene's staff address. No dramatic language, no accusation, just a sentence she could defend. Today's Exhibit E was entered into the record after being omitted from the public packet. For preservation purposes, please confirm the filed version matches what was read into the record. She hovered over send. Then she heard something in the hallway. Footsteps, not rushing, not lingering, stopping outside her door. Leona froze. Her breath went shallow. The laptop screen glowed like a spotlight. The footsteps paused and Leona heard the faint scrape of paper sliding under her door. Then the footsteps moved away. Leona sat still for a full 10 seconds listening, heart pounding so hard it made her ears ring. Then she stood, moved to the door and picked up the paper. It was an eviction notice. Not from her landlord directly. Those usually came in plain envelopes with typos and bad grammar. This one was clean, printed, official looking. It cited building code remediation, mandatory temporary vacancy, and non-compliance with inspection scheduling. Leona's hand shook as she read. She had never missed an inspection. She had never been told about remediation. Her landlord barely fixed the heat when it failed. This wasn't about code. This was about leverage. The machine didn't need to threaten her with a gun. It only needed to threaten her with homelessness. Leona pressed the paper to the table and stared at it as if staring could change the ink. Then her phone rang. It was her supervisor again. Leona answered, voice careful. "Hello." His tone was brisk. "Leona, you contacted outside parties." Leona's jaw tightened. "I contacted preservation channels." "You're making this worse," he snapped. "I told you to stop." Leona stared at the eviction notice. They slid an eviction notice under my door. A pause, then quieter. "Leona, listen, I can't protect you if you keep pushing." Leona's voice went flat. "Who asked you to protect me?" His silence answered. Leona ended the call and sat down slowly. Her sacrifice loop became painfully concrete. She had done a small moral act, silent, procedural, clean, and the cost was now aimed at her home. The threat wasn't abstract anymore. It was paper under a door. It was Riley's blanket on the couch. It was the way Riley asked, "Are we okay?" Leona folded the eviction notice carefully, as if treating it gently could keep it from breaking her. Upstairs in Malcolm Keene's world, consequences looked different, but they arrived too. He stood alone in his penthouse office, staring at the city skyline that had always made him feel in control. His counsel had left. His phone kept buzzing with messages from his board, his investors, his public relations team. "Don't let a hearing derail this. City needs us. We need a statement. This looks like weakness." Malcolm set the phone down and rubbed his eyes. He hadn't slept well in years, not since the early days when fear and ambition were the same fuel. He had learned to bury discomfort under speed. But now, speed felt like a trap. He picked up the worn silver key from his desk and held it in his palm. The key had come from his mother's jewelry box after she died. It was the only thing of hers he kept that wasn't sentimental. No letters, no photos, no voice recordings, just a key that opened something, though he had never used it. He didn't know why he suddenly felt like he had to. Maybe because his mother's voice, buried in his memory, kept repeating, "The first lie is always the one that sounds like paperwork." Malcolm grabbed his coat and left without telling anyone. He drove himself. No driver, no entourage, down into parts of the city he usually passed over like blank space on a map. He ended up on Lark Street without planning to. The row houses looked smaller in person than they did in council packets. Paint peeled, porch railings leaned. Kids' bikes lay on their sides in small yards. Malcolm parked and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, listening to the ordinary sounds of life. A dog barking, a radio playing somewhere, a child laughing. He saw an older woman on a porch holding a photograph frame, staring at the street like she was waiting for someone to return. Yvette. Malcolm's chest tightened. He got out of the car and walked toward her slowly, not wanting to startle her, not wanting to be the kind of rich man who appeared suddenly and made people feel smaller. Yvette saw him and stiffened. Her eyes narrowed. "You lost?" Malcolm stopped at the bottom of her steps. "No," he said quietly. "I think I've been found." Yvette stared, unimpressed. "You're the billionaire." Malcolm nodded once. "My name is Malcolm." Yvette snorted softly. "I know your name. It's on every glossy piece of paper they sent me. Like that makes you care." Malcolm swallowed. "I didn't read the relocation framework closely enough." Yvette's laugh was sharp, but there was no humor. "That's a fancy way of saying you didn't look at us?" Malcolm flinched slightly, because she was right. Yvette held up the photograph frame. "This was my husband standing right there," she said, pointing to a spot near the porch steps. He built this railing with his own hands. You think your consultants see that? They see blight. They see corridor. They don't see him. Malcolm's throat tightened. I'm trying to see now. Yvette's eyes searched his face like she was looking for the lie. Trying ain't a plan. Malcolm nodded. You're right. He looked down at the street, at the houses, at the small signs of lives that didn't appear in packets. A child's chalk drawing on the sidewalk, a broken mailbox taped together, a wind chime made from old keys. Old keys! Malcolm's fingers tightened around the worn silver key in his pocket. Yvette watched him. Why are you here? Malcolm hesitated, then spoke honestly. Because someone in that room today, someone who didn't have to, made sure the truth didn't get erased. Yvette's expression shifted slightly. The reporter lady. Malcolm shook his head. The court reporter. The one with the steno machine. Yvette frowned. I didn't even see her. Malcolm looked up, eyes steady. That's the point. She was invisible, but she did something that cost her. Yvette's gaze hardened with sudden understanding. They'll come for her? Malcolm nodded slowly. I think they already are. Back in Leona's apartment, the clock ticked past midnight. Leona sat at the table, eviction notice folded beside her laptop, Riley's breathing soft from the couch. Leona stared at her email draft and felt the weight of every possible outcome. If she sent it, she might lose everything. If she didn't, other people would. She thought of Evelyn in the basement saying, "Wrong is a flexible word in this building." Leona whispered to herself, "Then I'll be rigid." She hit send. Comment, "Hold on," if you've ever been that close to losing everything. Outside, somewhere in the hallway, a floorboard creaked. Leona didn't move. She just listened, hand resting on the table near the eviction notice as if she could keep her home from being taken by touching it. And in another part of the city, Malcolm Keene stood on a cracked sidewalk looking at the homes his project would condemn, and finally understood that relocation wasn't a line item, it was a rupture. He put his hand in his pocket, felt the silver key, and realized he might have been carrying the missing piece of this story all along, but he didn't know it yet. And Leona didn't know that the next morning the machine would come at her harder than a text message or an eviction notice. Because when the system can't erase the truth, it tries to erase the person holding it. The next morning began with a knock that didn't sound like a neighbor. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't rude. It was measured, official, and certain, like the person knocking knew they had the right to be there. Leona's eyes snapped open in the dim light. Her heart was already running before she sat up. She listened. The knock came again. Same rhythm. Riley stirred on the couch. "Nana?" Leona moved quickly, quietly, putting herself between Riley and the door without thinking. "Stay there," she whispered. "Just stay." She looked through the peephole. Two men stood in the hallway. One held a clipboard. The other wore a jacket with a city emblem stitched on the chest. Inspection. Leona's stomach dropped. She opened the door only a crack, chain still on. "Can I help you?" The man with the emblem spoke in a rehearsed voice. "City inspection. We're here regarding mandatory remediation and temporary vacancy." Leona held his gaze. "I didn't receive notice." The clipboard man lifted a sheet. "Notice was issued." Leona's throat tightened. "Issued by who?" The emblem man's eyes stayed polite. "Ma'am, we're not here to debate." Leona's fingers tightened around the chain. "My granddaughter is here." The clipboard man glanced past her as if Riley were an object. "Then you'll want to comply quickly." Leona felt something rise in her chest, fear turning into something sharper. She could have argued, she could have cried, she could have pleaded. Instead, She did something simpler. She said, "One moment," closed the door gently, and walked to the table. She picked up her laptop, opened her transcript file, and pulled up the timestamp section where Exhibit E had been read into the record. She opened the scanned images of the exhibit list discrepancy. She opened the email she'd sent the night before. Then she called Evelyn. Evelyn answered on the second ring, voice calm. "Records." "They're here," Leona whispered. A pause. Then Evelyn's tone tightened. "Inspection?" Leona swallowed. "Yes." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Listen to me. Don't let them in without paperwork you can copy. Ask for the work order number. Ask for the authorizing department. And Leona..." "Yes?" Evelyn's voice lowered. "They're not here for your walls." Leona's throat tightened. "I know." Evelyn said, "You need an initiating authority today." Leona swallowed. "How?" Evelyn hesitated. "There's a municipal auditor's liaison line. It's not public, but I have it." Leona's heart slammed. "Evelyn!" "Write it down," Evelyn said, voice crisp now. "And when you call, don't tell them a story. Tell them you have an attempted retaliatory displacement following a public record discrepancy and you have time-stamped transcript evidence. You ask for an emergency preservation request. You hear me?" Leona nodded even though Evelyn couldn't see it. "Yes." Leona scribbled the number on a scrap of paper, hands shaking. At the door, the knock came again. Leona took one steadying breath and went back, chain still on. "I need the authorizing paperwork," she said, "and I need the work order number." The emblem man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Ma'am, this is a compliance matter." "And I'm asking for compliance," Leona said, voice steady. "Paperwork." The clipboard man sighed and held up a sheet, trying to angle it through the crack. Leona didn't take it. She took out her phone and snapped a photo of it. The clipboard man's face tightened. "You can't..." "I can photograph anything you show me," Leona said. "If you don't want it photographed, don't show it." The emblem man's polite mask cracked for half a second. Leona saw it. Then she heard Riley behind her, soft and scared. "Nana?" Leona didn't turn. She couldn't afford to show fear to people who fed on it. "Go get your shoes," Leona said gently without looking back. "Just in case." The words tasted bitter. When the men left, temporarily to return with additional documentation, Leona closed the door and locked it, then leaned against it for 1 second, eyes shut tight. Then she stood up and made the call. The auditor liaison line rang 3 times. A voice answered, brisk. "Office of Municipal Audit." Leona forced calm into her voice. "My name is Leona Price. I'm requesting an emergency preservation request. I have transcript timestamps and documentation regarding Exhibit E in yesterday's redevelopment hearing. I also have an active attempt at retaliatory displacement using city inspection." Silence for a fraction of a second. Then the voice changed. "Ma'am, how did you get this number?" Leona swallowed. "From records." Another pause. "What is your evidence?" Leona didn't explain feelings. She didn't dramatize. She gave facts. "Public packet omitted Exhibit E referenced on the official exhibit list," Leona said. "Exhibit E was entered late, and its language includes eligibility exclusions that materially affect residents. I recorded the entry. I have a transcript marker. I have scanned pagination discrepancy images. This morning, city inspectors arrived with an immediate temporary vacancy notice. I have photographed their paperwork." A longer silence now. Then the voice said, "Hold." Leona's hands trembled as she waited. Down across town, Malcolm Keene sat in a quiet office he rarely used, a small room off his main suite. No windows, no art, just a desk and a drawer he never opened. He had come in early before his staff, with the worn silver key in his pocket like a confession. He had driven to the old neighborhood the night before, not out of charity, but out of discomfort he couldn't outrun. Now he stood in front of the drawer that had always stuck, the one his mother's old belongings had been placed in after her death, things he'd ignored because grief was easier when it stayed locked. He took out the silver key and tried it in the drawer. It fit. The drawer opened with a soft click that sounded like a held breath released. Inside was a small stack of papers tied with faded ribbon. Not love letters, not photos, documents. His mother's handwriting covered the top page in neat, careful script. Malcolm. If you ever have to sign something that moves people, read this first. His throat tightened. He sat down slowly, as if his legs didn't trust him. The papers weren't sentimental. They were practical. His mother's kind of devotion. Notes from community meetings, copies of old municipal relocation standards from years ago created after a lawsuit that had forced the city to protect residents during redevelopment. She had underlined key clauses: right to return guarantees, non-discrimination by paperwork status, independent monitoring. Then Malcolm saw one line she'd circled twice. Any relocation framework without independent preservation becomes a tool for erasure. Malcolm swallowed hard. He remembered his mother coming home tired, hands smelling like old paper and coffee, telling him, "Always look for what isn't being said." He had built his whole life on what was being said, on contracts and projections and signatures, and now someone invisible had done what he had not. She had looked for what was missing. Malcolm's phone buzzed. A message from his staff. Court reporter Leona Price. City inspection at her home this morning. Possible retaliation. Malcolm's chest went cold. He stood up and walked straight out of the room, not caring who saw him. Back in Leona's apartment, the auditor liaison returned. "Ms. Price," the voice said, "we are initiating an emergency preservation request for the digital archive entries related to Exhibit E and associated packet versions. You will forward your transcript marker and documentation immediately." Leona's breath caught. "Thank you." The voice added, "And Ms. Price, do not communicate further with the city department without counsel. We will contact the relevant offices." Leona's knees almost gave out. Not because she felt safe yet, but because the machine had finally met something stronger than a polite lie. Leona forwarded her files with shaking hands. Transcript marker, scanned pagination, photographs of the inspection paperwork. She attached everything as cleanly as she could, like she was building a bridge out of evidence. Then her phone buzzed again. A new text. "You think an audit saves you?" Leona's throat tightened. Before she could respond, she wasn't going to respond, another message arrived. From an unfamiliar number. This one was short. "This is Malcolm Keene. Please don't delete anything. I'm coming to meet you." Leona stared at the screen, heart pounding. She didn't know if she should feel relief or fear. Because if Malcolm Keene was moving toward her, it meant the truth was moving upward. And when truth climbs, the system either bends or it breaks something on the way. Comment "finally" if you felt the shift right there. Leona looked toward Riley, who sat on the couch hugging her library book like a shield, eyes wide. Leona forced her voice gentle. "We're going to be okay," she said, even though she still didn't know what okay would cost. Outside, in the hallway, the sound of footsteps returned. Not just two men this time, more. Leona's breath caught, because the machine wasn't done pushing, and the next push was going to test whether the truth had arrived in time. The footsteps stopped outside Leona's door again, but this time they didn't knock. They talked to each other in low voices like people discussing a locked gate. Leona stood very still, phone in hand, listening. Then she heard a different sound, someone speaking into a radio. A clipped voice. Official. Leona's stomach dropped. She glanced at Riley, who had gone quiet in the way kids do when they sense adults are afraid. Leona walked to the couch and crouched beside her. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "I need you to do exactly what I say." Riley's eyes were huge. She nodded. "If anyone asks you questions," Leona said gently, "you look at me first, okay?" Riley's lower lip trembled. "Are they taking us?" Leona swallowed hard. "No," she said, even though she wasn't fully sure. "We're not alone." The lock rattled. Leona's breath caught. She moved to the door and spoke through it, voice steady. "Who is it?" A man's voice replied, "City compliance. Open the door." Leona held her phone up, already recording audio. She didn't announce it. She didn't threaten. She just made sure the truth had somewhere to live. "I need identification and the authorizing department," Leona said, "and I need you to slide paperwork under the door." A pause, then a different voice, slightly sharper. "Ma'am, if you refuse entry, we can escalate." Leona stared at the door, heart pounding. "You can slide paperwork under the door." Silence, then paper scraped under. Leona picked it up and read quickly. It wasn't a warrant. It wasn't court-ordered. It was an emergency access request tied to imminent hazard mitigation. Vague, convenient, urgent. Leona felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself steady. Her phone buzzed again. "Malcolm Keene." "I'm outside. Building entrance." Leona's breath caught. She moved to the peephole and looked again. And there, at the far end of the hallway near the stairwell, she saw a man in a dark coat, tall, composed, not surrounded by bodyguards. He held up his hand, palm open, like a quiet promise. "I'm not here to hurt you." Behind him, two people in plain clothes stood with badges clipped at their belts. Not city inspectors. Audit. Leona's chest tightened with relief that felt almost painful. The compliance men at her door shifted when they noticed Malcolm. They glanced toward him, then toward each other. Power recognized power. It always did. Malcolm walked closer, eyes on the compliance men. "Good morning," he said, voice calm, almost polite. "I'm Malcolm Keene." The man nearest the door stiffened. "Sir, this is a city matter." Malcolm nodded. "It's also a matter connected to a project being funded under my company's participation. And there is an active emergency preservation request initiated by municipal audit, which means any retaliatory displacement attempt is now part of an investigation." The compliance man's face tightened. "We're not retaliating. We're mitigating hazards." One of the badge-clipped audit staff stepped forward and spoke crisply. "Do you have a warrant?" The compliance man hesitated. "No." "Then you're not entering," the audit staffer said. The compliance man's jaw clenched. He looked at Malcolm, irritation flashing. "This is unnecessary." Malcolm's voice stayed steady. "It's necessary because she's not alone." Leona's throat tightened at the word she, not her name. Not yet. But she felt seen, and that feeling was complicated. Being seen could protect you. It could also paint you brighter. Leona unlocked the door and opened it slowly, chain removed now. Malcolm looked at her for the first time up close. His eyes flicked to her badge, court reporter, then to her face, tired, wary, holding herself upright by sheer will. He spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Thank you for yesterday." Leona's voice came out hoarse. "I didn't do it for you." Malcolm nodded once. I know. Behind Leona, Riley peeked from the couch, small and scared. Malcolm's gaze shifted to her, and something softened in his expression, a human crack in the polished surface. He didn't smile big. He didn't perform kindness. He simply lowered his voice. Hey, he said gently. I'm Malcolm. I'm a friend today. Riley stared at him like she didn't believe adults got to be friends on purpose. Leona stepped slightly in front of her anyway. Instinct. The compliance men retreated down the hall under audit scrutiny, muttering about paperwork and schedules. The hallway quieted. The building settled again. Leona's knees almost gave out, but she stayed standing. Malcolm turned to the audit staffers. I want the preservation request broadened, he said. Not just Exhibit E. I want every version of the packet, every upload and removal log, and any communications tied to public distribution decisions. One audit staffer nodded. That can be done. Malcolm's jaw tightened. And I want the city to provide a written explanation for why compliance showed up here this morning. Within 24 hours, or my counsel will pursue injunctive relief. The words were legal, but the intention was simple. Back off. Leona swallowed. They'll keep coming, she said quietly. Malcolm looked at her. Then we make it harder. He stepped into her apartment carefully, as if he knew he didn't belong in the small space, as if he understood that power should enter softly. He glanced at the past due envelope on the table, at the eviction notice folded beside it, and his expression tightened. Not pity, not shock, just a grim recognition that the machine had teeth. I brought someone, Malcolm said. He gestured to the hallway, where a woman in a simple coat waited, calm, composed, holding a folder. She's an attorney who handles retaliation and housing stability. Pro bono, if you want. Leona's throat tightened. She didn't trust help easily. Help had conditions. Help had hidden hooks. But this didn't feel like charity. It felt like repair. Leona nodded slowly. Okay. The attorney stepped inside, introduced herself quietly, and began asking Leona for facts, not feelings. Dates, documents, photos, the kind of questions that turned fear into something usable. While Leona spoke, Malcolm walked to the window and looked out at the street below. He didn't say much. He didn't perform outrage. He listened. And then softly, he said, My mother worked on relocation protections years ago. Leona turned toward him, startled. Malcolm pulled the worn silver key from his pocket and set it on the table beside the eviction notice. It opens a drawer, he said. I never opened it until yesterday. Leona stared at the key. Malcolm continued, voice low. She wrote notes about what happens when relocation becomes a loophole. She underlined clauses that kept families from being disqualified by paperwork. Yesterday, I watched the city try to do exactly what she warned about. And I realized I've been signing things without listening. Leona's voice was quiet. Listening is expensive. Malcolm nodded. So is not listening. It's just other people pay for it. The attorney cleared her throat gently. We can seek a restraining order against retaliatory inspections. We can contest the eviction notice. And given the audit involvement, there may be grounds for immediate injunction on any condemnation action until relocation standards meet state requirements. Leona swallowed. State requirements? The attorney nodded. The city can't do whatever it wants just because it writes it in a packet. Malcolm turned back to Leona. I'm going to request an independent monitor for the relocation framework, he said, and I'm going to pause my company's participation until it's in place. Leona's eyes narrowed slightly. They'll say you're holding the city hostage. Malcolm's mouth tightened. Let them. I'm not interested in being the reason someone loses a home because a clause was written to disqualify them. Leona felt something loosen in her chest. Just a fraction. Not trust. Not yet. But the sense that the truth had finally reached the top, and the top hadn't immediately swatted it away. Over the next days, the machine fought back, but now it had to do it in daylight. The audit office issued formal preservation notices. City servers were imaged. Email chains were pulled. The compliance department suddenly became quiet. The gray-suited man stopped returning calls. Malcolm's counsel filed for a temporary injunction, citing the transcript record and the late entry of Exhibit E as evidence of inadequate public notice and material misrepresentation. Leona's name appeared in filings as a witness. She hated seeing it. She hated being visible, but she also understood the strange power of being named. Because once you were named, it became harder to erase you. Yvette Aldridge attended every hearing that followed, photograph in hand. She didn't shout. She didn't perform. She simply sat in the front row now, eyes steady like a wall built of years. The young father brought his folder again, this time with the attorney's card tucked inside like armor. Leona returned to City Hall once, not as an employee. She was still suspended, but as a witness with counsel. She walked past the marble steps and felt her heart pound like it wanted to run away. But she didn't run, because Riley's hand held her sleeve this time. Riley insisted on coming, insisted on sitting in the hallway with a juice box and a book like she was guarding her grandmother. The day the audit report's preliminary findings came back, Malcolm sat in a small conference room with the city attorney and the mayor's chief of staff, the air tight with forced politeness. The audit liaison placed a folder on the table. Multiple versions of Exhibit E were uploaded, she said calmly. One version contained broader protections. That version was removed prior to packet distribution. The removal was performed using a credential tied to the redevelopment consultant's office. The city attorney's face drained. Malcolm's jaw clenched. The liaison continued. Additionally, internal emails show explicit discussion of omitting renter protections to reduce program costs and accelerate approval. The room went very still. Malcolm spoke quietly. So, it was intentional. The liaison nodded once. Yes. Malcolm leaned back slowly as if absorbing a weight he'd been pretending wasn't there. The mayor's chief of staff tried to recover. We can correct the language. Malcolm cut him off gently. It's not language. It's ethics. Then Malcolm said the words that shifted everything. I'm requesting a full independent review, he said, and I'm withdrawing from participation until the city adopts protections consistent with state law, monitored by an external auditor. The chief of staff's polite mask cracked. Malcolm, you can't. I can, Malcolm said, voice still calm, because my company isn't a tool for your shortcuts. Leona read about it later in a short local article buried under bigger headlines. No spectacle, no humiliation, just the machine forced to stop mid-step. Leona sat at her kitchen table that night, Riley asleep on the couch again, and stared at the silver key Malcolm had left behind. He hadn't asked her to keep it. He had simply placed it there and walked away, as if trusting her with it was a way of honoring what she'd done. Leona didn't know what to do with it yet, but she knew one thing. The truth had finally caught up. And now, justice wasn't a hope. It was in motion. Months passed in the way months do when you've lived through a storm. Slowly, with small surprises, with moments that still make you flinch even after the danger has moved on. The redevelopment project didn't vanish, it changed. That was the part people didn't understand at first. They expected either a bulldozer or a miracle. They expected the rich man to swoop in and buy everything, or to walk away and leave the neighborhood to the city's appetite. But what happened was quieter, and because it was quieter, it lasted. The city adopted revised relocation standards under pressure from the audit office and a state-level housing compliance review. The revisions weren't poetry, they were clauses. They were numbers and timelines and enforcement mechanisms, things that didn't make people clap but did make them safer. Eligibility exclusions were narrowed. Past due fines no longer disqualified families from assistance. Informal occupancy could be verified through utility bills and affidavits, not just perfect leases. Temporary lodging limits had extension triggers written in. Right to return provisions were measurable. Independent monitoring wasn't optional. And perhaps most importantly, the documents were preserved before they were distributed, with audit logs that couldn't be cleaned without leaving fingerprints. The gray-suited man, whose name Leona learned through the audit report, wasn't dragged into a public spectacle. He resigned quietly, for personal reasons. The consultant firm lost its contract. The compliance department underwent review. No one threw tomatoes. No one cheered in the street. But families stopped receiving mysterious eviction notices under their doors. That was the kind of justice that mattered. Leona's suspension ended, but her job didn't return to what it had been. Her supervisor called her into his office with a face that looked tired and careful. "I can put you back on city assignments," he said, voice guarded. "But understand, you'll be watched." Leona nodded. "I was watched before. I was just ignored." Her supervisor's jaw tightened. "That's not funny." Leona didn't smile. "I'm not joking." She didn't go back to City Hall full-time. Instead, the attorney Malcolm had brought helped Leona secure a stable contract with a regional court service that handled multiple jurisdictions, less dependent on one city's mood, harder to silence. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a promotion in the way people imagined, but it was steady. It was safer. And steady was the thing Leona had been chasing her entire adult life. The eviction notice was defeated, not with anger, but with paperwork that finally fought on her side. The housing attorney filed a challenge. The audit office flagged retaliation. The landlord suddenly withdrew the notice with a short apology that didn't sound like his voice. Leona didn't celebrate. She simply slept that night without listening for footsteps. Riley changed too. She stopped asking, "Are we okay?" Every time the lights flickered, she started leaving her shoes by the door in a neat line, not because she feared running, but because routine felt safe again. On a Saturday morning in early spring, Leona took Riley to Lark Street, not because they lived there, because Riley wanted to see it. They walked slowly past the row houses, past porches where people now sat with cautious relief. Some homes had small signs taped in windows, "Right to return, not for sale, community first." The signs weren't flashy. The ink bled slightly in the rain. They looked like someone's cousin had printed them late at night. Leona loved them. They stopped at Yvette Aldridge's porch. Yvette sat in a chair with a blanket over her knees, photograph frame resting on her lap like an old friend. She looked up and squinted. "Well," she said, voice dry, "look who survived." Leona smiled softly. "We did." Yvette eyed Riley. "And you're the kid." Riley nodded, serious. "I'm Riley." Yvette studied her for a long moment, then patted the porch step. "Come up here. You can sit. Just don't touch my plant." Riley climbed the steps and sat beside her, careful. Leona stayed at the bottom, hands in her pockets, letting the scene happen without forcing it. Yvette looked down at the photograph frame. "My husband would have liked you," she said to Riley. Riley's eyes flicked to the photo. "He built the railing?" Yvette's mouth softened. "He did." Riley traced the air near the railing in the picture, not touching the glass. "My Nana writes words," she said quietly. She wrote words that stopped them. Yvette glanced down the street, toward the spot where Malcolm's black car had once parked. "Yeah," she murmured. "She did." Leona felt her throat tighten, but she didn't let it spill. She had learned long ago that some tears are private. Later, as Leona and Riley walked back toward the bus stop, Leona's phone buzzed. A message from Malcolm Keene. No long speech, no announcement, just a photo. It showed a small drawer opened in a simple office, filled with old papers tied with faded ribbon. On top, his mother's handwriting. Below the photo, he wrote, "I finally read her. Thank you for making me slow down." Leona stared at the screen. Riley tugged her sleeve. "Who is that?" Leona hesitated, then answered honestly. "A man who had to learn something." Riley frowned. "Did he learn it?" Leona looked down at her granddaughter's face, bright, stubborn, alive, and thought of all the people who had done small moral things that never made headlines. Evelyn, in the basement. The clerk who had spoken into the microphone with shaking hands. Yvette holding a photograph like it could stop a machine. Leona herself scanning a missing page because she couldn't stand a polite lie. "He's learning," Leona said softly, "and the learning is sticking because people didn't let him forget." That afternoon, Leona returned home and found an envelope taped neatly to her door. Not slid under, taped, careful, respectful. Her name was handwritten on the front in plain ink. Inside was not money, not a check, not a gift card that would make the story feel like a commercial. It was a key. Not the worn silver one. Leona still had that, resting in her drawer like a reminder. This was a new key, simple, brass, and a note. "Leona, this key is for the records room's public archive cabinet. Evelyn insisted the community should have monitored access to what concerns them most. No one should have to beg to see the truth." Leona read the note twice. Then she sat at her kitchen table, held the new key in her palm, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Belonging. Not to a person, to a process that had finally made space for people like her. That night, Riley fell asleep on the couch with her library book open on her chest. Leona turned off the lamp and stood in the quiet apartment listening. No footsteps, no knocks, just the building's old pipes settling and the soft rhythm of Riley's breathing. Leona walked to the drawer and looked at the worn silver key Malcolm had left months ago. She turned it in her fingers once, then placed it back gently. Some symbols weren't meant to be displayed, they were meant to be kept. Because they reminded you that the world can change, sometimes not by speeches, but by a small, silent act that refuses to let the truth be erased. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share it with someone who needs hope. And when this ends, click the next video on your screen. I promise it's worth it.